Robert, is there anything you'd like to say, or are you happy for me to kick off?
I'm happy for you to kick off.
Yeah,
Just great that this is going ahead. This
perfect.
link between two different communities with so much to benefit from sharing.
Lovely, thank you. Okie dokie. I think we'll let people join as they arrive. So good afternoon to everyone that's here, and welcome to this Urban Design Group lunchtime event, Place Names Past and Future. This is one that we've been trying to organise for a while, so we're all very excited to have our experts here today. I'm Hannah Smart. I am incoming chair of the Urban Design Group and founder director of Edge Urban Design. And I'm very delighted to be hosting this session. It's a chance for us to explore how the past shapes the places we design, plan, and inhabit today. And my personal opinion is that we can't design places for tomorrow until we've understood where they've come from and where they are today in order to create a narrative for their future. So I think this is really fascinating and powerful work. And history isn't behind us, it's beneath us. So it emerges through the street names, the field boundaries, lost wetlands and woodlands. And when we understand these layers, I think we make better places that are more rooted, more distinctive, more vernacular, more comfortable, and more connected to the communities that we call home. And perhaps they're also happier places. I think that's one for discussion. And good placemaking is never just about what we design or build, it's about also what we protect and celebrate. So, this afternoon, we are joined by three exceptional researchers whose work brings that richness into focus. Guys, if you'd like to give us a little wave so everyone can, there you go, perfect, thank you. We have Dr. Abigail Lloyd, who comes to this field through a wonderfully varied career, including practice as a commercial chancery barrister. Her research delves into early medieval place names and the subtle relationship between hills, settlement, and farming, revealing the fingerprints of different linguistic communities across the landscape. She has worked across both secular and ecclesiastical planning systems, contributed to the National Digital Database of Historical Place Names, partnered with GeoPlace and local authorities, and developed GIS map tools that bring the past into present day decisions. And importantly, if you're ever looking for her in the wild, you will start with an upland bog, which is where you'll find her today. Welcome, Abigail. And Susan Kilby is a medieval historian with a special interest in how landscapes, rural and urban, shape identity. Her work on street names includes research into problematic names, which I'm sure you will tell us all about, and how Nottingham's rural fringe has influenced the character of its modern streetscape. She has collaborated closely with Nottingham City Council and contributed to a forthcoming volume on Nottinghamshire's place names. Dr. Susan's work reminds us that even the most ordinary street plate carries echoes of older communities and older uses of land. And last but by no means least is Professor John Baker. He's a leading voice in name studies and medieval scholarship, having worked at the Institute for Name Studies since 2005. His research spans interdisciplinary projects that use place name evidence to better understand historical landscapes and to inform contemporary challenges from education to public engagement to modern street naming practice. And John's work shows how small fragments of language can guide meaningful decisions in the present. So, together, this team will reveal why history is indispensable to placemaking. Because when we can understand what came before, the stories, the patterns, the land use, the meanings, we can create places that feel authentic rather than arbitrary, which I think you'll all agree is something that's very important as an urban design community. Places that belong and places that speak to the people that live there. So, welcome to all of you today. I'm going to hand over to you, and we can't wait to hear what you've got to say. Over to you, John.
Thank you for that introduction. Can I just check? Can you see the slides that are on the screen? Excellent. Well, thank you, Hannah, for chairing, and thank you, Robert, for inviting us, and thank you to everyone for turning up today. I'm going to introduce some of the work that we've been doing at Nottingham, but I'm going to speak very briefly. The exciting presentations are going to be given by Susan and then Abigail. But I wanted, first of all, I suppose, to think about why Nottingham. Immediately, there we go. I change. Institute for Name Studies sounds very grand. I should say from the outset that we're a very small institute. There are about 3,500 permanent members of it. But Nottingham is recognised as the main centre for place name research in the country. And the Institute itself was formed about 20 years ago, partly to house the English Place Name Society. The English Place Name Society itself, which is a scholarly society, operates on a charitable basis, but it was formed about 100 years ago as a means of providing financial support for the Survey of English Place Names, which is a British Academy project which started, I suppose, about 102 years ago. And the purpose of the Survey of English Place Names is to provide authoritative surveys of place name material for each county of England. It was founded at a time when people were recognizing the need for a more rigorous and methodologically sound approach to understanding place name material in England. And just to give you a sense of what that means, that's a rigorous approach. A lot of what we do at Nottingham is to gather early material relevant to the names, early records of names, and to consider that early material and try to understand the earliest forms of those names. So, for example, if we look at Nottingham itself, it's always quite a shock to our first year students when they discover they've come to study at a place that was named after someone called Snot. But we can see that by compiling those early forms that the earliest form of Nottingham was in fact Snotingham. So it's the homestead of the followers of someone called Snot. And that in itself tells us quite a lot about language. We've got an Old English place name, but it's probably undergone Anglo-Norman or Norman French influence, which is why the S has been lost. It tells us about social structure, the followers of someone called Snot. It tells us about an individual called Snot. It tells us about the settlement itself that was once there at Nottingham. Nottingham, of course, is a very major name, so we have a lot of early material for that. But the same principles apply with much more minor place names. Here we've got the example of the Occupits, just in Shropshire, which you can see that the field called the Occupits right at the bottom of the tithe map on the left-hand side. And if we only had the spellings going back to the 17th century of this, we'd be able to tell that it probably referred to pits of some kind, but we wouldn't be able to interpret the first part of that name. So again, it's only by looking in the archives, digging out early forms and gathering them together that we can actually get to the bottom of the meaning. So here we have a form from just over 100 years earlier than that last one I showed, which shows us that the origin of the name is actually Oakway pits. It's the Oakway pit. And so again, that's telling us something about perceptions of landscape, perhaps also use of landscape. The pits presumably were dug for a purpose. So we're learning about local understanding of landscape. And this is a key point with place names. They arise as descriptive labels originally in everyday speech. So they capture everyday perceptions of landscape and are different in that sense from the kinds of record we get from documentary sources. And because place names are ubiquitous, I mean, we have major place names, field names, river names, street names, house names. They provide a very a wide-ranging and I suppose, for want of a better word, a kind of democratic view of the landscapes of the past. So that's about a little bit about our methodology and the sorts of things we do. I'm going to pass on first of all to Susan and then to Abigail, who are going to talk about some of the projects they've worked on at Nottingham. Susan, first of all, who's going to talk about her work with Nottingham City Council, advising them on street naming practice. And then after Susan, Abigail will talk about her work in a recent project, working with GeoPlace, again, thinking about street naming practice and policy. So I will now stop sharing and hand over to Susan.
Yeah, great. Okay, so during my section of our talk, we're going to be looking at how street names provide important evidence for earlier social and economic history in both urban and rural settings. And I want to think about some of the main historical themes that are covered by pre-modern street names. And as Hannah has already suggested, how some of these names can be problematic for anyone involved with the naming of modern streets. And then I'll finish with a brief look at some of the work that the INS has undertaken with Nottingham City Council before handing over to Abigail. And I just want to mention that although my examples are drawn from Nottingham, the thematic strands that we're going to be considering, I think, are applicable to any settlement in England. So, broadly speaking, these are the key themes into which our street names can be categorised. Most, although not all of these themes have been in use since the medieval period, mostly from the 13th century onwards. So if we have a look at some of the older themes first, I hope you can see my cursor on the screen there. Let's look, just in case you can't, at top left-hand corner at Stony Street, which you can see as a descriptive name. Now, Stony Street is actually Nottingham's oldest recorded street name, and it dates from the early 13th century. But of course, it's important to note that this is, of course, not necessarily the same thing as it being its oldest street. This one provides a really good example of a descriptive street name, in this case telling us that the street was paved with stones. If we head over to the top right now, up here to look at names that include occupational names like Nottingham's Barkergate, so the street of the tanners. And I probably should mention at this point that gate in this instance is from the Old Norse garter, so it means street rather than the modern gate. Nottingham, of course, is in the Danelaw, and so there's quite a lot of Norse influence. We've got marketing names like Timber Hill, so a place where timber was sold. It's just off the Old Market Square in Nottingham. And streets that were named because of prominent buildings. So here we've got Moot Hall Gate, the street of the meeting house or the courthouse, which dates from the 14th century. And this is a street name, I should say, that was replaced by Friar Lane by the 17th century. Now, it's important to note that its earliest form doesn't appear on any maps of Nottingham, so it's only known through written documents. John has already shown you one such document, and we'll have a look at some more shortly. Many names recall town's agricultural past and are drawn from agrarian activity, like Cow Lane over here on the left. This is a lane through which cattle were driven to market. And as John's already mentioned, field names are a really important category here. Many names reference people, so we've got a couple of examples up at the top here. Halifax Place, named in this instance for a medieval mayor of Nottingham. And then we've got commemorative names like Albert Street, which would commemorate Prince Albert, of course, and this one, which I'm going to be coming back to, Carrington Street. And it's this latter group that can be problematic. So we'll talk about that in a little while. So on the face of it, many street names appear to be fairly transparent and pretty easy for non-specialists to interpret. But that's not always the case. And I want to begin by looking at a couple of medieval occupational names. So first up, we've got Fletchergate, and I imagine that quite a few of you are now picturing, you know, the city of Nottingham and Robin Hood and bows and arrows, and you could be forgiven for thinking that here we've got an arrow maker. But when
Yes,
we look at
of course I am.
when we look at early spelling of this street name, we can see that this name actually has a different etymological root. So the earliest indications dating back to the middle of the 14th century here, we've got flesh hewers, which is a really nice word. I hope you agree. And it's an early word that's synonymous with butcher. So we don't have arrow makers, we actually have the much more mundane butchers. But without those early spellings, just as John identified, it would be really easy for non-specialists to gloss this incorrectly. I've included Bridlesmithgate here just because it's an unusual occupational name. Bridlesmiths made horses' bits. There's quite a lot of this sort of heavy metal industry in Nottingham in this period. And the other thing I'd like you to notice about this is that whilst we've got quite a few of these early attestations of these names recorded in English, you can see that both of these names are also recorded in Latin. That quite often happens and can help us to pinpoint precisely what's going on there. And both of these streets feature on this beautiful map of Nottingham from 1610. Of course, it's John Speed's map, the earliest map that we have for Nottingham. So I've already alluded to the fact that street names can be unstable. We were talking about Moot Hall Gate earlier, morphing into Friar Lane. And that happens extremely frequently, as I'm sure most of you will be aware. But my first example here is Pelham Street. This is modern Pelham Street. It's very close to the centre of Nottingham, as you can see. Here's the marketplace. And this particular street name was named after the family name of the Dukes of Newcastle, who own a great deal of land in Nottingham at this point. But this is a street name that's gone through various changes, with its earliest incarnation you can see up here being Great Smith's Gate, so the Street of the Great Smiths, or a great street, a large street associated with Smiths. And this is a name that we only know about from documents that predate the city's earliest maps. So again, we've got an example here of the kind of document that we might use in order to find names like this. And if you follow my cursor, I hope you can see it. You can see Le Great Smith Gate. Now I'm showing you that. I'm sure you can all read it quite easily. I also thought you'd enjoy Mount Street, which was once Bearward Gate, the street of the bearkeeper, which offers a glimpse of the kinds of entertainment available in medieval Nottingham. And again, that is only apparent through its early street names. We wouldn't know about that from any other context. Let's have a look at some of the agrarian names and particularly field names, because this is quite a nice, these form really nice possibilities for modern street names, I think. So it's not unusual for those naming streets to be influenced by towns and cities' agricultural hinterland. And this is Goldswong Terrace. And you can see that it's originally derived from another Old Norse element, vangra, which by the time of Middle English in the High Middle Ages comes to mean field. And it's either golden field or a field associated with a person called Gold. And if you look up to the right, you can see overlain on top of the sort of standard mapping, a kind of transparent version of this Health of Towns map from 1840, and Goldswong Terrace is precisely where it is most appropriately cited. You might be forgiven for thinking that this next example relates to a place where geese were found. Or perhaps sold. And Nottingham, of course, has a famous goose fair that dates back to the Middle Ages, and so Goose Street would seem fitting. But when we once again look back to the earliest spellings, we can see unequivocal evidence for it being named after a person called Goose, in this case Robert Goss. And here we've got from the Latin at the top, away sometime of Robert Goss. So Robert Goss is actually not even any longer associated with that by 1308, but this name sticks, and you can see that eventually it is modern Goosegate as we would understand it today by 1539. And then if we look at Plumtree Street, the first thought might be that this references a plum tree. And actually, in many places, that's probably going to be correct, but not here in Nottingham, where it refers again to a prominent Nottingham family in the city since the Middle Ages, well, the town since the Middle Ages, and there's a nice etching of the house. And with this type of name associated with people, it is usually the case that they had some association with that street. So it's not a commemorative name, it's just that this street was kind of synonymous with those particular people because they lived close by. Now, let's have a look at some of the more problematic names, and these are those commemorative names that I was referring to earlier. This type of street name is much more modern. Generally speaking, the majority of these commemorative names are coined from about the 18th century onwards. And this example celebrates Robert Smith, Lord Carrington, and he has both a street and a district named after him in Nottingham. We can see from the slide that he's a really important man who did many works of import for the city. In fact, his family are wealthy because they found England's first provincial bank, so the first bank outside London. And if we look at this aerial shot of early Nottingham, we can see, if you can follow my cursor, I hope you can, this is Carrington Street here. This is actually a scene that you can't see in Nottingham anymore today because it was knocked down, or part of it was knocked down to make way for the building of the Broadmarsh Centre. And the reason that we get Carrington Street here is because Robert Smith becomes the leading trustee for a charity called Collins Hospital, and these are the almshouses that are being built in 1828. And we've got an extract from Nottingham Corporation's records, and we learn that at the point at which they're erecting this hospital, they're going to lay out diverse streets. One 50 feet wide and to be called Carrington Street. And this has come from a report from the trustees' surveyors. So it is actually Robert Smith himself suggesting this name of Carrington Street. And so far, so good. We can see that he is, a really important person in Nottingham's history. And although he had an undoubted positive impact on Nottingham, we also know that he owned plantations in Jamaica where enslaved people laboured. So here from this map of 1804, we can see his three properties in Jamaica quite close to Spanish Town. And alongside that, we can see this is the deed of transfer that he signed in 1798. You can see his signature down here, and an extract from a register of enslaved people. And if we look up here, you can just about make out his name. And this this document lists all of the people that were essentially owned by him. And Smith leased these properties for 2,000 guineas per annum, the equivalent of about £200,000 per year today. So we can see that streets named in commemoration of people can be problematic. So just very quickly, I wanted to finish by giving a quick overview of some of the consultancy work that we undertook with Nottingham City Council. And this is an area of the city under development. It's a Bedford Row development. And they asked us if we would undertake research, and you can see that they asked us to look at some of these existing street names, or former street names, I should say. They were no longer there: Cavendish Street, Sydney Street, and Woburn Street. And those names are likely to have aristocratic connections, and we can't tell without detailed research, but we would suggest avoiding those. And you can see that a senior highway engineer suggested something gritty and Victorian because we're quite close to Bath Street, named for the Victorian baths that you can see on the map here, or something associated with Vikings. So we undertook some research and provided a report that included several field names that we knew to be close to this development site. One set of field names that you can see at the bottom of the slide indicated a tile house, a place where tiles were made, and this was suggested alongside additional field names. And these were made because they had a very strong connection to Nottingham's early history and landscape. And as you can see, those new street names were adopted by NCC. You can see Tile House Gate. They've added a nice Viking aspect to that particular street name. And we've got over here Flaxlands, Oxencroft and Dovecot. And I will stop there, and so that Abigail's got plenty of time for her slides too. So,
okay, fantastic. So, following on from Susan, what you've got here is actually an extract from a manuscript which is Domesday Book from 1086, and the highlighted name is Santa's Dona, which we'll come back to in a minute. I'm going to be talking about historical place names, why and how we should use them. And essentially, this is our things we've learned from the project we did with GeoPlace and with 4 local authorities, Plymouth, East Cheshire, Derbyshire Dales and Mid Sussex SNNOs, that's street naming and numbering officers. Now, street naming and numbering is actually highly circumscribed by law. It is a statutory duty that's imposed upon local authorities. The law itself goes right back to sort of the mid 19th century. And when I started this project, I was quite surprised as a former lawyer to find how many of these statutes were still on the statute book, still extant. And each local authority prides themselves on using a different one. And they also have their own framework, their own local enabling acts and their own code. So it's well worth, if you're doing any development, to contact your local SNNO for the area where the development is and find out what their process and procedure is. But GeoPlace are a partnership between the Ordnance Survey and also the Association of Local Government Authorities, and they offer national oversight and highly useful organisation for that reason. And they have a code of practice, so this sort of quasi-legal code of practice. It's all available on their website. And as a result of the work that we've done, as part of the street naming considerations that have to be taken into account when offering new street names for new development, it's been newly inserted that opportunities have to be taken where possible to use historical and local place name information to inform modern street naming. And that's also been embedded into some of the local policies, for example, in Derbyshire Dales and in Mid Sussex. And there's also been sort of contact with various developers, for example, David Wilson, to make them aware of this as well. So it's something that's sort of very much embedded in the law and policy in this area. So that's the sort of framework briefly. But really, why do we have this framework and why is there this requirement? Well, it's because of the need. One of the big things that street naming and numbering officers have to do is go through a process of consultation whenever they've been offered new names. For example, by developers, they have to consult stakeholders and in particular the public and local parish councils. And something that came back to us again and again in feedback, whether it was from the SNNOs themselves or just members of the public, was that people were very tired of bland and homogenous names that seemed to be driven by marketing considerations but didn't really have any link to the local area, or at least no obvious link that people could follow. And that was something that people said, even if they'd never ever thought about place names before, or etymologies, or historical evidence. And I don't know if you've ever watched The Fall and Rise of Reggie Perrin, but Reggie Perrin, the character, constantly walks through this humdrum suburban area in London, and he's always viewed walking past Wordsworth Drive and Coleridge Close and Tennyson Avenue, and that's the sort of thing that we're tapping into here. There's also quite a lot of parish council burnout. So in some areas, for example, one of the areas we looked at had a big Homes England development spanning 10 years, and there's just so much development going on that the local parish councils, and many of these would have been rural parishes, now being bolted onto a suburban and urban area, they've just slightly lost the will to live in terms of being able to supply new names and being able to audit and really provide meaningful input to those names that are coming forward from developers. And there's also, as we're all aware, often hostility and resistance to large-scale development, and concern about it too, and a feeling of not being engaged or consulted. And actually, what we found in these projects was that the historical information informing these modern names was able to reverse that trend and begin to pique local curiosity and enable local engagement. So instead of feeling like, why is this happening and we've got no control over it, people were able to realize that they could learn through this process about something about their local area and start to engage with it through that. And also, the other thing that came home to us through this project was that because the sort of information we're providing at the INS, the Institute, is backed up by over 100 years worth of knowledge and study and expertise, it has the status of independent expertise, which actually secured people's respect from all sides of the debate. And so one SNNO told me that the process was far smoother than she had feared. She had a slightly contentious airfield development to deal with, and she'd worried that, normally it's quite difficult to secure buy-in and agreement, but because the things that were being offered came with this report underpinned by our research, actually on all sides, whether it was the parish council, the public, or the developers themselves, there was agreement. And there was a lot for them to choose from as well. That's the other thing. There's a huge amount of material once you start diving into the history of these places and their names. And so there's lots to choose from, which gives lots of choice, but also it means that for future use, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but then that's a resource that one can draw on for the future as well. And I've already said, despite all the problems and difficulties surrounding this process of naming, it is a clear requirement to link a modern development into the history of a place and to do that through a name where possible. But again, what came out to us from this project was a sense of, well, how do we know we need to do this and we want to do it, but how do we do it? And how do we find the time and the resource to do it? And that's what this project demonstrated to people, is how you could do it. You may also know that street naming and numbering has a lot of modern constraints. So names have to be not repetitive. There mustn't be confusion. I mean, things very important, things like emergency services and utility provision, they all ride on having a distinctive name that isn't subject to confusion and also doesn't have any unfortunate associations. And those can be the kinds of things that Susan's outlined to us, or they could also just be because the meanings of words have shifted and things that were acceptable, maybe even comic in the past, are now no longer acceptable, or vice versa. And maybe historic spellings, people think they're going to be too difficult or too hard. So occasionally we got a sense from people that it may not be possible to use historical place name information for those reasons. But again, I think we were able to demonstrate that that isn't the case. So if you remember that first slide with Doomsday, Santis Duna on it, well, one of the things about the survey of place names is, as has already been explained, what we do is we try to chase back a spelling of a name as far back as we can into the earliest documents and materials we can find. And then in the published volumes and also in our online database, this is the earlier version, we've got a newer version now, we lay that out. So you've got a long list of historic spellings. And sometimes the earliest spellings are they're really different to the modern spellings because we've had so much change in terms of consonants and vowels and shifting forms that you wouldn't know that the two were linked unless you'd done that process. So in Buckinghamshire, there is a place called Saunderton, and that actually originally comes from an Old English word dune, meaning some form of hill, and possibly Sandhera, so some kind of Old English personal name. So Saunderton is the modern form, but earlier on in Doomsday in 1086, it was Santis Dona or Santis Duna. And when I was doing a bit of field work, I was so pleased to see in a new estate right by Saunderton railway station that Buckinghamshire local authority had decided to name this estate using the Doomsday spellings. And so we've actually got two words that are referring to the same place, but there's no risk of confusion because they're so different. And there's therefore it shows you how you can draw on this material to sort of, even though it's the same name, you can draw on material for multiple names. And then this is possibly a bit of a daunting slide, but it's just showing you a PDF or screenshot of the published volumes. Now, it's very dense, and obviously it's like a reference work, basically. It's almost like a dictionary that you'd go back to and consult. But again, just showing you the abundance of material you've got to work with. But also, what I felt was quite important is it's not just cherry picking one name here or one name there. You know, names by themselves might seem relatively unimportant or mundane, but actually, when you're trying to understand the sense of character and place, if you study an area and study all the names in that area, even if it's just a local settlement or township or parish, you really begin to build up a sense of that character and place. And it could be things like the topography and the geology. So watercourses really stand out, and that's because, you know, before modern roads and modern bridges, how you crossed a waterway was really important. So, for example, in Cheshire, we've got Somerford, which is a ford that was only used in the summer because you can't cross it in the winter. And down in Plymouth, there were lots of ford names, things like Efford, which is an ebb ford, so a ford you can cross at low ebb, but not at high tide. And then we've got things like Radna, which is referring to the red bank, Riad Ora. And so it's a sort of the red sandstone that you get a lot in Cheshire. And then there's things like these field names, Soon Field. And you might think, you know, well, what is Soon? But actually, Soon is the dialect way of pronouncing and spelling sand in Cheshire, and it crops up a lot. And the Cheshire editor of the survey is able to tell you that that's what that means because he's seen it throughout that area. And so again, it's referring to the sandiness of the red sandstone that is seen in the soil, but also you're preserving something of the local dialect and the local pronunciation, the way they speak. So you're getting that overall picture of history and character, but also the local particularity. And then there's the tithe maps. So I know some of you may well use tithe maps a lot for your research. And sometimes when you're wading through a tithe map, it can feel like it's pretty samey. But actually, again, if one sits down and studies them systematically, as we do at the Institute, interesting names really pop out to you. And also that sense of character is built up. What a particular favourite of mine is Snuffy Grubby Field, which was down in Sussex. So Snuffy being a field that wasn't really up to much, and Grubby having been recently dug out and cleared of trees. But this example is actually from Macclesfield. And again, this was more of an urban area. But previously, Macclesfield had a large hunting park to the west. So in the tithe map, we can still see the remnant of that hunting park before it's infilled by development. And there's a field there called Far Muck Ridding. And again, with your modern sensibilities, you might think muck refers to something that's distasteful and dung and dirt. But actually, if we chase it back into the earliest spellings, what we realise is that we've got a place that's Mitchell Ridding or Muchel Ridding, and that is referring to a big clearing. So again, this sense of clearing the land, making it usable, partly clearing it for hunting and for in parked land, and then it becomes arable as well. And then what's happened is that ch sound has been replaced with a hard k sound, and that's something that we often see in areas influenced by Scandinavian dialect. And so again, we can build up this picture of the linguistic community that's been in this area in Cheshire. There's quite a few other publications that we have produced at the English Place Name Society and the Institute, and they really help you to recover not just the topography and activity, but also a sense of the farming regimes and maybe even lost industry in places. For example, the salt works in Cheshire. And there's particularly field names. We've got dictionaries of field names and the vocabulary of English place names. Again, coming out of the project we've just done, things like Denture Field. Now, in dialect in Sussex, that's referring to the practice of digging up the turf and burning it on the ground where you've just dug it up. And then that has a result of fertilising the land. So it's a land improvement, but the name actually comes from Devonshire, where the practice first started, and then it's migrated over to Sussex, and it's present in Sussex dialect, and it's probably present elsewhere as well. So this Denture Field. And then rainbows is actually, again, referring to the kind of concentric ploughing that happened in some areas. And so you create the shape of a rainbow in the soil with your ploughing, which could be viewed from above. And we can also combine these things with geology. So again, this is coming from the project. This is down in Plymouth, where river crossings are really important. And in one area, we've got some very distinctive geology. We've got Devonian slate and basaltic intrusions and extrusions. And marking one of these river crossings was a place called Mainstone, which, if we take it as an Old English word, means a mighty stone. So perhaps something really significant to tell you as a traveller where it's safe to cross. But there is also a possibility that this is a Brittonic word, main, meaning stone. Now, Brittonic is the predecessor to Welsh and Cornish. we're right on the border with Cornwall here, so we think that that's not surprising that we might have something that's saying stone, stone, which seems a bit redundant, a bit pleonastic. But actually, that could be telling us about that fusion of Brittonic speech and Old English speech. So there we're picking up on the dialect, the linguistic history, the history of the English language, but also the topography and the way people were getting around and navigating this landscape. Now, just one worked example. This is the English Dialect Dictionary, which is available online. This is Yarwell, taken from Middlewich in Cheshire. Now, this comes from Old English. The first part comes from Old English yare, which is referring to a fishing trap or a weir. And the second half is not actually well as in a constructed shaft, like we might think to get water out. Weller referred to a spring. And this picture is actually St Winifred's Well, which is over in Oswestry, Maysbury. Winifred being a princess who lost her head when she refused a suitor, and where her head fell, a spring burst up, and then St Bino came along and put her head back on her body, as was his wont. So we've basically got a word that is referring to a fishing trap or a weir and a spring. And there's lots we can do with that. We could keep with the Old English word, and maybe just change the spelling slightly to reflect the fact that it's a y sound at the beginning, Yarwell. Or we could translate half of it, Yar spring, yeah spring. Or we could have weir spring, so translate it fully. And we've got alternatives there, fishing spring. So the idea behind that is just to show you that even with one name, there's so many different possibilities of what you can do with it for modern naming. And you can use the old forms as we did at Saunderton, or you can start to do bits of translation. So this really is quite a big supply of information for you, as well as the themes it reveals about the history and the character of the place. So just to conclude, you're all very aware, I'm sure, about the need to get the history of the character and the place into your design process and your development process early. And that's key for everybody, really. But one thing I was thinking about is the fact that some of our names refer to the shape of plots and places. So this was one, Periment, which actually might be coming from an earlier spelling for a pediment. And it might be referring to the fact that the field has the shape of a pediment. And then there's another series of field names, which Angus Winchester was talking about in Cumbria, wallet field names. Now, these are fields that have two sort of blocks at right angles to each other. And you might wonder why that's a wallet field. But it's actually because wallet was referring to the kind of saddlebags that you might have over a pack horse, or we might have over bicycles today. And so you can imagine, if you think of the shape of that, it's two sort of square blocks at right angles to each other. Now, if you're thinking about designing for a particular plot, it's helpful to know that the shape has been really quite significant and noted in the names before you start chopping up the plot and dividing it up. And you want to be able to work with that in your design process, as well as working with all the rich understanding of the history of that place and character of that place. Lots of different levels of research are possible. In the GeoPlace project, we did everything from a very quick response to Macclesfield development, for example, where the developer was actually on the phone and wanting names very quickly, all the way through to that 10-year project with Homes England, where there's lots more time to do the kind of primary archival research that Susan was talking about. And of course, the great thing about all of these names are that they are quintessentially georeferenced. So we can provide coordinates for all of them and get a GIS layer with all this information. And that the SNNOs particularly like that possibility because it means they can really target the use of names for particular developments and make sure that names don't get used in a vague way when they'd be better used somewhere else. Now, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we did do a webinar for SNNOs, and the QR code should take you to the web page where there is a video of that webinar and also downloadable help sheets, effectively, with resources that are available online for desk-based research, and also a bit of a flow chart on how to go about doing this. Okay, thank you very much.
John, did you want to come back in, or?
No, well, just thank you, Susan. Thank you, Abigail, for covering so much ground there. Thank you.
Yeah, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. It makes me realise that I thought I knew a bit, and there's a lot more that I don't know. So that was absolutely fascinating. Would anyone like to kick off with any questions for our guests? Please do feel free to raise your hand. There's some interesting comments in the chat. Richard Easton your point here about made up names. I don't know if you're still here and if you'd like to ask about that or make the point.
Yes, hello, I am still.
Hiya, you're right.
I thought it was really fascinating about going through the historical record and using that to inspire new ones. But my question was really about brand new words that are completely made up. And the reference I gave with Renault in the 1990s, coming up with words that had no meaning previously, but were designed to evoke a certain emotion through their sounds and vowels and consonants and the mixes. And the link with AI and people using prompts, I just thought that there might be some really awful shortcuts that are being attempted that can be tempting to developers rather than doing it properly, as we've just heard from the speakers.
Yeah. Can I say something on
Did
that?
you want
And
to
I
say
think,
that?
sorry, go on.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, I mean, I'm sure, yeah, there's always a desire to do something new, and I'm sure AI will have a role. But what I found particularly was that there is a sense when you're developing something, particularly when it's new development of previously undeveloped land, or even infill that's been not developed hitherto, there is a sense of loss, I think. People have a sense of loss and they want to be sure that they're not losing everything and this isn't a complete eradication of all that's gone before. And we found that names, historical names, were really important for people to feel that they weren't losing everything. And that what I was saying at the beginning about enabling that buy-in and that sense of we are still preserving and even celebrating all that has gone on here before. And yes, it's not a barrier to creativity and new development and even new naming. It's that you understand what's gone before and then anything new springs out of that and plays with it. You know, it could be creative and we offered lots of different alternatives and we showed our working, you know, what we were suggesting. And then even then, I think parish councils would also play around with it too and developers too. But it certainly people engaged with it more and respected it more because they felt like it really was anchored into history. And we also saw the SNNOs being very keen to really make sure that it was quite immediately anchored into the history. So not just a vague sense of general connotation, but that it had some sort of heft behind it in terms of being substantively linked.
Yeah, I think that's so that it's because I guess Renault are trying to create a different kind of identity for a different kind of community, and the work that Abigail and Susan have done is thinking about local identity and community and how that can be reflected in naming practices. So it's two different communities, I suppose. But as just to sort of follow on from what Abigail was saying about her work, I mean, a lot of some of the interesting stuff was the fact that actually having the historical material could give inspiration for ways of naming that weren't necessarily using that historical material, but were thinking of ways of naming that reflected historical practices. So it's not just the historical forms of names or it's the historical vocabulary sometimes, but actually it's also just the traditions, the ways of naming, the practices that can perhaps be learned from as well, I think.
Roger, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Several people have mentioned SNNO, and I have no idea what that means.
It's a street naming and numbering officer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Do you want me to? There's a one from Reza. Is that from Reza? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I was going to go to that one next. Reza, are you here? Would you like to just ask your question?
I'm happy to. Well, we could answer it even.
Yeah, go for it.
And Susan might have something to say on this too. I think I certainly saw a lot of desire to commemorate First and Second World War people, and it's something that SNNOs, street naming and numbering officers, see a lot. There's always a concern about checking with the family. There's also a concern about just due diligence in case there's anybody, although they were a soldier, there may also be unfortunate associations. They are quite worried about using personal names, even when people have died, just because of all the difficulties in the past. That doesn't mean that there aren't, that they're definitely, I think a lot of the suggestions coming from parish councils tended to focus on sets of people, so suffragettes, for example, and yes, war commemoration. I think what I discovered was that parish SNNOs find that there's a particular theme that people run with, but it's very difficult to think outside that theme. So they might well use that theme for a bit of the development, but then they don't want it all to be that theme. They do want some other ideas, and that's where what we could offer, it would help people go sort of further back in time. So not just as far as the First World War or the Second World War or even the suffragettes, but also reflect what else has happened there in the hundreds of years before.
Susan.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of that, and I definitely agree that naming streets after people can be problematic. I mean, we're not just concerned about these 18th and 19th century names. We can all think of people who have been, extremely prominent in British life, who will have had monuments, streets named after them, and those names have all been kind of expunged from the record, if you like. I think the other thing is that if you're looking at a whole development, that's one thing, but where you've got, let's say specifically World War One and World War Two fallen, you've then got a problem whereby do you just pick one name or do you choose all of them? And that suggests to me that you could end up getting in quite a pickle with people locally if names are missed off the list or what have you. So yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd just like to go to Cameron. Cameron, Abby, are you here? Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Wonderful, cool. So my question was, how will new towns and settlements, e.g. announced by New Towns Force, get given street names if the existing land is Greenfield? Will they draw inspiration from the surrounding settlements? And how were Milton Keynes street names chosen?
Quite a big question there. I mean, I guess that the Greenfield sites, if they're being developed, so this will come back to the processes that Abigail's been talking about and how that is managed locally by SNNOs. I mean, those Greenfield sites, in many cases, there will be type maps and there will be earlier material, so that there will be field names, and there may be other kinds of names there that could be used, whether they will be or not. Abigail, did you want to?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the other thing, so there's a perception that things are greenfield, and I know for modern planning they're marked as brownfield and greenfield, etc. But actually, that's a very modern allocation, and it makes people think that nothing happened in these greenfield sites. But actually, there's an immense amount of history that you can draw on, and some of the stuff that Susan and I look at is the way in which medieval settlement can have almost gone and shrunk to just a field name, but actually it could have been a really thriving place with a really distinctive industry and a lot going on there. So I think it's helping people to think beyond the parameters that we've created for ourselves in the 20th century, and realize what else has happened here. So I personally don't think there's too much of a problem finding information for greenfield sites. I think people think there is, but that's again, it's the way in which tapping into history opens things up for you.
And actually, Susan wrote a whole book on the sort of names that you'd find in greenfield sites, I think, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Just to answer the final part of your question, Cameron, about how Milton Keynes street names were chosen. I mean, I've driven through Milton Keynes, and so I'm fairly confident about answering this in the context of another new town, which is Peterborough, which I know really well. And actually, when you travel through the new estates in Peterborough that were built in the 1960s and 70s, you will see that a lot of those street names are drawn from local field names. And looking at the type of names that we see in Milton Keynes, I suspect that they went through the same process. I hope they didn't just make them up, but I don't know Milton Keynes as well, but I'm pretty confident that that's what will have happened. It's the kind of Oxencroft and Flaxlands and those sorts of things that you saw on my slide from Nottingham.
Great, thank you. Roger, there you just made the point about your favourite road name in Sheffield, Let's Be Avenue, because of the police office. Let's Be Having You. Great one. Just wanted to reach out. Does anyone out there want to ask their question? Just because we only have a few minutes left. So if anyone's kind of desperate to ask, put your hand up.
One from Shahida Montgomery about the languages involved. I could answer very quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
So if we're talking about major names, about the names of towns and villages, then there are quite a few different languages involved. The main one is Old English, so that's the language spoken, or the form of English spoken up until about the 11th or 12th centuries. We have Old Norse, which was the language of the Vikings. We have Old French from the Norman influence. We also have some Latin influence on place names, Brittonic and Celtic influence that Abigail mentioned. And we actually have some place names that probably go back to even earlier languages that we don't fully understand, but which must be very early. So that's a sort of quick run through the kinds of languages we find.
So I'm just going to pick up on a couple of others. Paul Stanley, you put a few comments in the chat, and your recent question here: has anyone detected trends or fashions in street names?
Well, yes. I mean that does happen, and I think that one of the first times that you see that happening is in the late 18th century and early 19th century. So we get quite a lot of names commemorating battles, Waterloo, Alma, those kinds of things, commemorating people, Wellington, for instance. These are very fashionable things, and I suppose in some instances they are the forerunner of some of these thematic names, but they are much more historically rooted. So yes, there are kind of moments when naming occurs, and I suppose the further back we go, the less problematic people saw as street names, whereas now we're having to think a little bit more deeply about them.
I was just going to add to that. I think something we haven't really covered is the way the names arise. So those sorts of well, maybe we just need to make it clearer that those sorts of names that might be subject to fashions are where you consciously decide to bestow a name on something. Some of the historical names we're talking about, we think they probably arose much more like a descriptive phrase, that you were just literally describing how to get somewhere or who was there or what was happening there. And when we go back to the earliest records, they actually look like a mini sentence. And then over time they contract and they become a name. So that's the difference, I think. And so what we're doing is tapping right back into that kind of stuff, and not just the names that at a particular point in time people have decided to use to commemorate somebody or something. Those ones are subject to fashion, I think.
That's brilliant. There's a question. Sorry, I've just lost it. From Neve McNanny here, who can't speak over the microphone. What would be the history behind historical street names drawn from areas that are very far afield? For example, streets in Birmingham called Dawlish Road, Tiverton Road, Tynemouth Road, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of ways that sort of name can. I mean, in Birmingham as well, you've got California and things like that. So you've got names that are distance names. Probably they arose as places that might have been on the edge of the parish boundary originally before the urbanization of that area, and they would call things like California just as a reference to somewhere that's very far away, a bit exotic, but basically a distance name. Names like Dawlish Road, I suspect, are connected with the building of those streets and the people involved in the people who own the land or who were involved in building it deciding them. I know Dawlish, you've got Teignmouth and other names nearby, haven't you, where there is clearly a link with the southwest. So I suspect that there are contexts like that. I don't know the specific case of that part of Birmingham, but I would think that it's going to be something along those lines.
Yeah.
And those are the sorts of things I think that both Susan and Abigail have come across in their work.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, I mean, I had some names on my slides like Woburn, which is, a long way from Nottingham, but is linked to the Duke of Bedford, and the Duke of Bedford almost certainly will have held land in Nottingham. There will be some kind of connection, and of course, we've got lots of Newcastle names in Nottingham for exactly the same reason. So again, landowners, that kind of thing.
I'd just like to ask you a question, actually. You have lots of people here in the audience who might be involved with creating new places, and our future towns and cities. What would you urge them to do from your point of view to make sure that they're including this important work in their master planning and design?
Well, I mean, I think as a first step, obviously Abigail's just shown the link to a lot of the resources we have and some of the training that she's created. I think probably as a first step, contact us as well. There are a few of us, but we're interested in getting involved in this kind of project, and as Susan and Abigail have emphasised, being involved early on is probably a more helpful point at which we can provide advice.
I put the link in the chat again.
Thank you, Abigail.
It's not buried. I can do it again if you want, but
I'll pop it in there. Oh no, hold on. Is that the same as the QR code link?
it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So if anybody didn't catch the QR code, it's this link here that I've just popped in the bottom. Oh, you've done it as well. Thank you, Abigail.
Somebody also asked for the name of Susan's book, I think.
Oh, okay. I'll put that in.
You could pop that in, Susan. That would be great.
Yeah, I will. Let me get a link.
Are you happy for your contact details to be available to anyone who wants to reach out to you?
Of course. So I'm john.baker@nottingham.ac.uk. If you Google me at the University of Nottingham, you should be able to find me as well. Do you want me to write that in the chat?
Great, thank you. Or feel free to reach out to the Urban Design Group as well, and I'm sure we can put you in touch. Thank you. Okay, I think we have overrun, so I don't want to keep everybody, but that has been absolutely fantastic and really great to hear from you all. So interesting, and I think it's, we all have a lot of work to do as designers to make sure that we're doing this properly and working with experts like yourselves as well. A tiny plug, we have got an Urban Design Group Christmas party in London in person. Come and have a drink if anyone would like to on the 11th of December. You can find a link on our website or on our social media. But yes, if everyone would like to just join me in thanking the team, that was really great, and hope to meet you all again soon, and you're welcome back anytime on this platform.